Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast, where iron is sharpening iron, and we help men navigate the complex world around them by taking the biblical example of Jonathan and his good friend David and future king as the inspiration for this show. If you want me and Jason to come out to a men's event that you're having, please reach out to us at thejonathanprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Again, thejonathanprojectpodcast@gmail.com. We also have a free men's devotional. That's right, 28 days of free goodness that can help you build your relationship with God and those around you. We'll have all that information and our links. Jason, welcome to another episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast with me, man. How are you doing today?
Hey, brother. Welcome. For everybody out there that doesn't realize this, my man here has been up since 6 a.m. after getting in bed at 2 a.m.
That's
for
right.
some quality 4-hour sleep.
That's right.
Greatly appreciate you, returning from vacation and being steadfast for the kingdom. So,
That's
man,
all right. And you know what? That's what we do for each other, because the week prior, folks don't know this, we doubled up on the episode because you had to travel out of the country. And we went on a short vacation to our North American cousins to the north in Canada. And for all our good Canada fans out there listening, lovely, beautiful country, glorifying God's creation there. That is for sure. There's some beautiful stretches of wilderness out there. But in any case, the travel, the logistics, the logistics were not sleep friendly. I'll just leave it at that. So there we are.
never is. It's like the lady at work that informed me. She goes, she asked me how, I travel so much with the military. And she goes, I said, it's a little rough. She goes, how do you sleep? And basically she's like, I don't sleep in strange places. And I'm like, I absolutely don't either. Like it's the worst.
That's the problem, right? And there is the problem. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We actually got a good one to talk about here today. I'm excited. I was sitting in the airport, and I was, for the audience, and I knew that we had to do the show tonight. We got back so you could get this fresh and on schedule on Tuesday as you're listening to us talk on your way to your commute or wherever you may be on this fine Tuesday morning. But I was reaching out to Jason like, hey man, what about this idea? As I was studying my Bible in a little space there at the airport, and I was like, hey, have you ever had that thing where you had to say yes to God when you wanted to say no? And laid it out for him. He thought it was a good idea. So Jason, what did you kind of center your thoughts on around this topic today? Saying yes to God even when you still want to say no.
Well, what I wanted to do when I saw this story in Acts, about Ananias
Yeah.
and Saul, I wanted to read the backstory. It's interesting because in my Bible studies, I'm in the book of Acts. Like I just got into it. I had just got to the story about another Ananias, right?
Yeah.
But as the story unfolds, the way it begins with Stephen. And it actually begins before that in Acts 6, where the Grecians, there's some grumbling in the church. And basically they are grumbling to the Jews about, hey, our widows are not being taken care of. So the disciples decide to anoint the first set of deacons, the first set of people, right? And they're going to be servants. And there was one of those that was Stephen. And if you follow along in Acts 6, 8 through 11, Stephen was full of faith, is what the scripture says, and power. He said he did miracles. And the synagogue of the Libertines, which was Roman Jews who were freed, the Cyrenians and the Alexandrians, rose up against him. But they couldn't resist his wisdom and spirit. So he was absolutely anointed, and he was taking it to him, right?
Yeah.
And so what did they do? In the King James, it says they suborned men. And I had to look that up.
Yeah, that's a fancy word. That's a big word.
It's a word.
Take out as disrespect.
It exceeded my third grade education. And it's basically they secretly bribed or influenced people to give a false testimony, to lie against him and to say that he spoke a blasphemy. And they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and brought him to council. I think we've heard that tune played before, just a couple of chapters earlier, right? And as he stands before the high priest, again, kind of a lot of similarities, Stephen speaks. Unlike when Jesus is there, he's just quiet.
Yeah.
Stephen speaks. And what I love is he paints a pretty good picture, historically highlighting how envy and stubbornness had spurred them to resist the Holy Spirit. He goes as far back as Abraham. So when we kind of get into this story, it's kind of relevant.
Yeah.
So here's Stephen taking it to him. Oh, you want to have a debate? I got the Holy Spirit on my side. Let's have a debate. Let's
Yeah.
talk. And so he starts out and goes, hey, he gets in there and Abraham's, explained how he didn't get any inheritance from his relatives. He moves on to Joseph, whose brothers, the patriarchs, sold him into slavery out of envy. And then it says he goes on about this, and he talks about how the people first rejected Moses. By the way, the guy that wrote the first 5 books, you're such a stubborn people, you rejected Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells them about this. And he also mentions how God is going to raise up a prophet. And they would reject him. And he continues on. And then he lets them have it. He calls them stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart, and tells them they resist the Holy Ghost like their fathers did, and calls them murderers and betrayers. And at that point, they stone him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when they stone him, they lay their cloaks at Saul's feet. And I did some reading on that, Colby, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the way they kind of vision it is that it was to free up arm movement so they could throw the rocks faster.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it says that Saul consented to it.
Yeah.
They trusted him enough that he approved the stoning. And believe it or not, according to the Jewish law, the witnesses were bound to be the first throwers of the stone.
Yeah.
Right? And they're, in fact, leading the execution. Saul consented to his death, and then he made havoc. They used the word havoc.
Mm-hmm.
Of the church, entering houses and imprisoning men and women, just dragging them out. And then, and that's in chapter 8, but then in going to 9, he's threatening to want to slaughter and imprison the disciples. And he asked the high priest for these letters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was a pretty wild thing. He's like, I want to take these letters. I want to be able to go anywhere and get them.
Sure.
And then on the road to Damascus, him and our best friend have a deep conversation.
Yeah.
So that was my back take on that.
Yeah.
Kind of going forward.
No, I mean, you're right. And Ananias and just the story of saying yes to a hard no, or to a hard task, I should say, so to a hard no, it's difficult. And that story of Saul being converted to Paul is good because Stephen became the first martyr for the church. But life is a series of yeses and nos, right? It's kind of like that younger generation and how they understand binary and computers and technologies, right? Ones and zeros. Really, our life and everything that kind of flows from is either a yes or a no. And God doesn't force us to do something. I find it was interesting, with Ananias, it was easy for him. And I think a lot of us could stand behind when he got the call to say, hey, I want you to go over here to what I think is the only name, we were talking about this earlier, the only named street in the Bible, which I found was kind of just a good biblical trivia thing out there for all you Bible nerds like me or Jason. Tell me if we're wrong, send us an email. But yeah, the only name street. So it's very specific, it's very detailed, and it's a yes or a no, right? Like, hey, I want you to go over here and talk to this. And Ananias is kind of like, well, it's like, who? This Saul. That's the guy that, jacked up Stephen. That's the guy that has everyone scrambling out of Jerusalem. The easy way isn't always the right way, right? If he would have said no, could we look at him and fault him? No. I mean, who wants to help Saul at that time, right? If you're a follower of the way, as they call it, or a Christian, as we call it now, God is calling us to say yes, even when it's uncomfortable. I think about Luke 9:23. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. It is not going to be easy, ladies and gentlemen, at times to follow Jesus Christ. It's just not. It's the reason why it's called the narrow path. It is a very difficult thing. And I think sometimes people get sung this sweet song and the by and by is going to be so easy. Yeah, it's going to be easy in heaven. Everything before that is sometimes it's just a slap in the face, and it's going to be
so easy.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing is it comes up to Ananias. So Paul's on that road, right?
Yeah.
And he gets met by Jesus. And
Yeah.
and you know, Jesus basically says, "Why do you persecute me?" And he says, "I'm Jesus, thou persecute. It's hard for thee to kick against the pricks." As we've all stepped on some things in our life, thorns and stuff, that's pretty painful.
Yeah.
And but it,
Legos from kids, that equals 2.
yeah, yeah. And he says, and I love Saul's response because this is a big say yes too.
Yeah.
Saul goes in verse 9 or chapter 9, verse 6. He goes, "What will you have me to do, Lord?" That's his only question. What do you got me to, what I got it. What do you need me to do?
Yeah.
Right? He had a complete rebooting. And of course he's blind and he goes there. And then I love another so there's Saul. Man, he's been persecuting people. He has to know that people are going to club him if they catch him,
Yeah.
right? He's got to be, if it wasn't Christianity, let's be candid. If people looked at him and says, "Wait a second, you are responsible for Stephen's death,
Yeah.
I wouldn't put you out if you were on fire in front of me with a set of wet chains." A lot of people would go, "Yeah, that's kind of true. I kind of align with that," but that's not what God calls him to do.
Yeah.
Saul gets told, "Hey, man, you're going to go here to Straight Street," which apparently I mean, obviously the Bible calls it out,
Yeah, yeah.
implies it. It's a real street. But then he tells Ananias to go. And Ananias is like,
Mm.
Lord, I've heard about this guy. No, he's almost like, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
No, and, which is pretty brave of
Yeah.
Ananias. But
Yeah.
he tells him, says, "You're going to go." And I love that because he goes, he says yes.
Yeah.
And when he gets there, he tells him, he greets him. He's like, "Brother." He calls him brother, which is
Yeah.
super important, right?
Yeah.
Like he didn't say, "Hey man, I don't," takes his sucker punch in when Saul's not looking and says, "That's somebody else, but I'm here to help you now."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
He didn't get his lick in. No. You're right, Jason, and I think God's call to him to go to his enemy. I think that maybe we haven't had something as bold as that in our own lives, but I think a lot of us can relate to, hey, you have that little prompt, that little thing like, hey, you should go and forgive so and so. You should make the first move, right? That could be with a spouse, it could be with a child, it could be with a coworker, or you've been tempted with something like, hey, you could cook the books a little bit if you have a business. You could take a little bit, you could deny something on your taxes, right? No one's going to know, but you've done the right thing, even though it was going to cost you a little bit. We've all faced those challenges, but God's hardest asks often lead to those biggest breakthroughs in your faith, if you really think about it. And the interesting thing to me, and I love finding these little stories that we bring forward for the audience, from time to time. Ananias is a blink in biblical history. If you
Yeah.
think about it, he had this awesome task, really overshadowed by Paul, who goes on to write, I think, a good quarter of the New Testament, and he played a part in that. All right, but it kind of like Joseph in the story of Jesus, right? Like, hey, he's there. We kind of tell little stories and clap for him a little bit, and the Christmas play, and then it's like, okay, get out, you know. But it's a powerful lesson for us as men, and this is what I mean, making a little lighthearted of it is you never know the eternal ramifications of being obedient.
Yeah.
Either one story from the Old Testament or the New Testament, both of these, Ananias and Joseph. Joseph, right? He plays such a part in rearing Jesus, though we get snippets of it. But what an eternal impact. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. I can listen to us talking about a father's role, even if you're not getting the applause kind of a thing. But and then Ananias, same thing. Like if he would have said no, we know the Bible well, and most people who are listening understand this. God will find a way to get his will done. You don't have to be used. That's okay. I'll still get it done, Haas. But Ananias stepped up to the plate. And what he can take away from that is what? Like, hey, I set the missionary Saul, who got converted to be Paul, on his way. I was the vessel through which God could be used. And for eternity,
Mhm.
that has ramifications.
So think about what Ananias was told. And by the way, I got a couple of points, but the first one is in the book earlier in the book of Acts, there's another Ananias, and him and Cephallias, I think is her name.
Yeah.
They basically were getting ready to sell some land and lied about it and wanted credit for it, and they dropped dead.
Mhm.
By the way, Saul is at this guy's house by the name of Judas, right?
Mm,
We know of another Judas.
mhm.
But yet in this one, they go from being bad names and representing bad stories to good names, right? Like
Yes.
Jesus is in the business of redemption.
Oh, yeah.
Just a free little thought there.
Mhm.
But as God tells Ananias, he says, "Go thy way." This is in verse 15. "For he is a chosen vessel unto me, and to bear my name among before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel." The Gentiles was literally thought of as the fuel for hell, right?
Yeah.
They just were. They
Yeah.
weren't the chosen people.
Yeah.
And kings, that's plural, so that means more than one, right?
Yes, sir.
So he's like, "This is what I want." And Ananias, it says, went his way and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him, he calls him brother Saul. I think that's really important. When we talk about forgiveness, when we talk about getting past it. I did some research, Colby, in psychology,
Yeah.
and there's tons of studies, right? Examining the relationship between forgiveness and personality is that higher levels of forgiveness are usually significantly associated with lower levels of what's called neuroticism. In other words, negative emotions, anxiety, worry, depression, and irritability.
Mhm.
And when you have that, and you react more to stress, and you have lower emotional stability, and you're more prone to self-doubt, right? But you find that people who take an active step in forgiveness have higher life satisfaction. They had another 2016 study that concluded a real statistical significance that self-forgiveness, forgiving of self, right? Which Jesus says, "I'm going to wash your sins away," which I think we hold on to our sins more than anybody. When you really come in contact with Jesus Christ and you get that real good glimpse of who you are,
Mhm.
right? Like, man, I'm lost. I'm not going to make it without you. I can't get into heaven. I know who I am. I'm not a good person.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we hold on to it. But even when we do that, it helps lower our anxiety. So that's putting our faith in Jesus. And I had another there was plenty more, but another 2015 was basically like applying forgiveness. It had better mental health. Well, here's Ananias. Man, he had every right to take a detour and go get a sandwich. Uh, nobody would have blamed him, you know?
No. No. But
He
no, sorry, go ahead.
no, but and then you're right, like, that's God's vessel,
Mhm.
and you look at what Saul did,
Mhm.
going forward. So, go ahead, bro.
No, no, I was gonna say, I was just gonna build off of something you said is talking about Ananias and how, he was willing to be used by the Lord, right? And I think that's a good lesson for us as men, right? It's amazing in Acts 9 and 12, God told now Paul, right, that Ananias was coming before Ananias was told. And what I took out of that, which was it kind of hit me, like I've read this before, but it really hit me in that part of the story is that God already knew through his sovereignty that he was going to say yes. But what I take away from that is it's not this magical thing. It is Ananias probably, I'm willing to bet, lived a life of obedience, right? He was the kind of man, he had the kind of integrities like that God knew he could call on him and say, "Hey, this guy's gonna get the job done." And that's what we need to do in all aspects of our lives as men, right? Whether you're having a business, whether you're in a relationship, whatever it is, you have to have that integrity when no one's watching. You can still be set up and be used, and it's going to count in a way that's mighty for the kingdom, right? Are you being faithful in the small things?
Mm,
Because Ananias was able to be used for something big, but I guarantee you he had a daily prayer life. If he had a family, he was providing, he was active in his church, he was serving his community, all the small things that, he's just going about his day. And it's amazing, kind of goes back to what Jason said when he first showed up. He was like, "Here I am, Lord. What do you need to do?" Paraphrase it. The other big thing that I really want to draw upon is his obedience wasn't about the spotlight, right? And especially for us in the modern world where you got Instagrams and likes and followers and people are making whole livings out of that of being seen. what you often find in the Bible and in the kingdom, if that's what you're looking for, God will give that to you, but that's all you're gonna get. And Ananias strikes us as a man. He didn't ask, okay, well, you want me to go talk to Saul? What am I getting out of that? Because I don't want to get whacked upside the head. Like, he didn't go there.
Yeah.
He kept it about the kingdom. And that's an important point. Like, serving the Lord is not always going to be glorious. You're not always going to get the applause of your fellow peers, but you're getting the applause of heaven, which should carry the day.
You said something earlier today when we were talking about Ananias showing up at, Judas's residence there for
Yeah.
Saul, and you're like, I probably would have carried a knife or something,
Yeah.
just in case.
This might be a setup.
Like, I don't know, Lord, maybe I got the wrong address,
Yeah.
but he didn't. He goes there and he puts his hand on him. And he says, brother, and that's so important of how we greet one another and how we kind of move forward. And it's even going further, Saul decides he's going to preach he doesn't get the order right. He goes, he starts preaching into the synagogues and they're like, no, we don't like you. And as a matter of fact, we're going to kill you. And he goes, they have to let him down outside the wall, right? The disciples
Yeah.
let him down outside the wall. And you think about that. So here's Ananias who's being very faithful, and Saul who's also being very faithful in this. And it comes a time where he's let down. And I thought about that. And, there's times we're let down. Like we start out and we go, hey, this is a natural fit. This is where I belong. Like Saul was like, I'm a Jew. I studied under Gamaliel and I got it. I got the information. I can connect the dots. And Jesus says, no, you can just speak to the Gentiles. And he doesn't get it at first, but he has to be let down. And then Saul goes to this other stuff, but he continues to be used, just like Ananias was. He was
That's a great
used, you know?
Yeah. Now that's a great point because there I think it's an important thing to pull out of the stories is being obedient, right? And even when you have a protest, you see it with Paul as you just laid out, like, hey, I can really be impactful for my homeland, for my people. And God's like, well, I don't know if you noticed, Slick, but you burnt that bridge to a crisp. Like, there's nothing left with them, right? We got to
No
send you
way.
somewhere else. But the same thing with Ananias. Ananias initially lays out, and he gets criticized by some scholars saying like, well, he didn't have good faith. No, he was a human, right? And I think sometimes we can church it up too much and like forget that God is in the business of people, and people are flawed and not perfect. Ananias lays out a good case, like, hey, this guy is not somebody I want to go hang out with. But you have to take away what you see with powerful biblical men doing, and Paul does it, and Ananias does it, David did it time and time again. At the end of the debate, when God says, hey, I still need you to go, they answer the call like, okay, I'm going to go,
Yeah.
right? Even old poor Jonah, who had to spend some time in a well, he eventually got it. He's like, all right, I'm going to go. And that's what you have to do, right? You have to be obedient without needing to know what's in it for you, without being like, hey, this is wrong. You got this wrong, Jesus. Telling Jesus, again, the living God, like, hey, like what you're saying is wrong. Like we have to let that go and just be obedient in the moment.
I had a sergeant major one time. We were in Iraq, and I've known this guy for a long time as I was a team sergeant, right? And he goes, we were kind of talking. We'd met up at Mosul. That's where he was. And I was kind of coming in and relocating. And he goes, look, I've known you for a long time. This is kind of where things are, this, and this. And he goes, look, we can shut this door and you can tell me exactly what's on your mind. That's between us. But when that door opens, there's one sheet of music. And I was so impressed with that because it allowed me to speak candidly. Maybe I didn't understand things and I could work through those problems, right? But it helped me grow. And I think and I've used that phrase with a lot of guys. And I think just like this, you get a look at an intimate conversation that Ananias has, which is a natural thing. We're
Yeah.
growing humans.
Yeah.
I don't walk on water. I'm an excellent swimmer for a reason. And at one point I was an excellent sinker, uh, and bounced out of the bottom. But I think, as we get asked by God to do things, it's okay to talk. Like my kids, if I ask them to do something, it's okay. that you want to talk, it's how you say it, right? Like, hey, I need you to take out the trash. Oh man, today we're taking out the trash. Yeah, son, it's kind of overflowing. We need to get it out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, moves on.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Jason, being able to express your heart, and I think there's a couple good examples that come to mind out of the Bible, and it's funny, it's a good transition to this into this part of my notes was is that Abraham said yes and left everything for a promise,
Mhm.
Genesis 12. Noah said yes, and there's a whole interesting we have so many conversations about Mr. Noah and the faith and just the mental strength that he had. I'll be honest, to give Noah some praise right here is I don't know any other biblical character that had to have stronger mental
Mhm.
fortitude than Noah because there's a lot of conversations just from a human aspect that he had to constantly say yes to God for, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine the man, the myth, the legend, the person that we worship all the time, Jesus Christ. But think about this: he had to say yes, and he even went to his father and was like, "Hey, if there's a way for this cup to pass,
Yeah.
let me know."
Let's talk about it.
But but he's like, "Let your will be done." He said yes. He said yes to all of us who rightfully deserve the punishment, right? And he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. I say all of that to say there is a deep, abiding payoff for your own personal growth, for your family's health, for your everything that you're doing to being obedient to God, right? He's not looking for perfect men. He's not, guys, because none of us are. I can tell you I've screwed up more times in relationships with my family, with friends, than I can shake a stick at. But he is looking for someone that's available, you're confident, and you're faithful. Like my good buddy shirt he has on, and we have the links. What should men do? You got to be steadfast, loyal, faithful, stand up, be strong, and be men, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's what Jesus is looking for, and I would just encourage you, there's hard things that you've been called to do. I guarantee it. I know it. Reconciling relationship, giving up a hidden sin, addictions,
Mhm.
right? Saying yes to serving, right? Helping out, saying no to comfort. All those things are out there and you have to find a way to do it. And, yeah, step up to the plate.
What if you're the guy that meets and helps the next Saul? What if you are, right? Look at the wonderful story of Anne Sullivan, right? How she's and actually the person who helped Anne Sullivan out.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's a great story, and I won't get into it. But if you research that, the person who helped her set the stage for Anne Sullivan to help out Helen Keller, right? God is not, man, there are no perfect humans. He's just
No.
looking for willing humans. Every character in the Bible, it's amazing because there's only so many books that they say, well, we don't have any recorded sin of this in this book, like Daniel and things like that, right? Doesn't mean they were without sin. There's only one person who was without sin, that's Jesus.
Mhm.
But everybody in the Bible was we're all fallible, right?
Yes.
Just got to be usable. So it
Yes.
goes along with it.
Yeah.
You want to know something, the truth? I think showing up every day is a superpower. Being willing to help is a superpower. You
Yeah.
know, I think sometimes we forget because we're so caught up in, I think it's this giant societal craze of what's in it for me and let me shine my glory, whether it be through social media or whatever, right? Like that's how we get our feedback,
Yeah.
or at least a lot of people do. I don't have a social media account, so I don't know.
Besides this
Yeah.
one besides this.
So, but we do, but really our value is within Jesus Christ, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just being willing to work, you know?
Absolutely.
He washed
Absolutely.
feet.
Yeah.
I please don't. I don't want to wash. I'm just gonna tell you right now.
No, all joking aside, there are a lot of those tough tasks that men have been called to do in the Bible, but it all centers on obedience, right? And I guess
Mhm.
my final thoughts here is you're probably hitting the parking lot or wherever you're at in your day. That narrow road that Jesus himself talks about is never easy, but it's always going to be worth it. Obedience to God is, rarely convenient, rarely comfortable, but it is absolutely eternal consequential. It can change families and generations. You never know when you, as a man, stand up and demonstrate following Jesus Christ, what they can do for your children and what those children can go on and lead someone to do. I think it's hard for us to see men, women, whoever right now on the eternal impact that we're having, and it can dissuade you sometimes. But I think one of the greatest things and coolest things are going to be when we get to heaven, you're going to bump into people like, hey, man, read your devotional. It's free. And I was glad that it was free because I was able to get it, and that helped me. And then it helped this person. You don't know, right? And it can be really hard in a place where everyone wants to be known and seen, but in the kingdom, you're going to be anonymous, man. There's a lot of secret agents out there as far as doing great things, but God is not looking for a spotlight beyond anything beyond his own glory, and that's okay. He's not looking for the most qualified. God, man, guys, we can be so hard on ourselves and not want to help because, yeah, I'm not the best carpenter, but you know what? Go to that thing that your church is having and just hammer some nails. And if you're not good at hammering nails, pick up a saw, whatever it is, just be there, hand out some water, hand out a biscuit, a bread, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Hard yes can become someone else's breakthrough. Like Jason said, you never know. And then private obedience is setting up someone else's public miracle. Guys, if you can't do anything else, if you don't take anything else out of this, and as I was blessed over the break to go through another year of life has been given to, I celebrated a birthday. If I didn't get anything else as I'm getting older, it's like, Lord, how can I be obedient to be consequential for you? How can I be that kingdom kind of focused guy every day in and day out, and just be obedient? So, one of the best things that I do, I show up here with my buddy and we talk on the airwaves about things on our heart, right? But you have a platform too. It might not be your own podcasts or whatever, but you have a family. They can go out and reach millions of people over generations. You have a business or you have a coworker, or you have something. Just stand up and be consequential. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need a PhD in theology to have an impact in the kingdom. Jason, what are your final thoughts?
God puts you right where you need to be. You're his ambassador. And the way I know it is ambassadors are placed, right?
Yeah.
That's the truth. The president, the king looks at that person and says, I need you for this problem here. And so that's where you are. And don't be fooled by a lie of Satan saying, well, I don't know my Bible well enough. I go back to the stories in the book of John and in where the guy was healed who was born blind. All he testified to was, hey, I was blind, now I see.
Yeah,
He
that
was
was a
talking
good
about
one.
what he knew.
Yeah.
Then you fast forward it in the book of Acts, they got this guy that was born lame that was 40 years old, and he's jumping up and down. And he goes, and they're asking him, he goes, I can walk. How about that? Not only could he walk, he could jump.
Yeah.
And talk about what you know. It's a personal relationship, right? Salvation is personal. That's what Jesus did for me. I don't get into the debates of, does Adam have a belly button? Was a dinosaur on the ark? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Speak personally and show up.
I love it. I love
Say
it.
yes.
Say yes. Well, folks, that's another great episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and all the other episodes you heard, and you're like, hey, I would love to have these guys come out, spend some time with me, my men's group, my business function, whatever the case may be, please reach out to us at the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Again, the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. If you need prayer, you're looking for resources, please again reach out to us at the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. This episode and every episode comes out on Tuesday mornings at 6 a.m. Eastern, wherever you may be on the planet at 6 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. This episode will be out Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Apple, you name it, you can find us there. So please subscribe, follow us, keep us in your prayers. Jason, again, brother, it's so good seeing you, even though I am running on vapors and fumes at this point.
I know you are. Go get some rest, man. Go get
I
some rest.
will. I will. Take care.
All right, bye.